listen, these are my triggers. And sometimes when I get very triggered, I fire off emails. I get kind of hyped up and I jump into action. And I've heard that this can be frustrating and I'm working on it, but it's not you, it's me.
Right.
Which I can understand managers listening to and being like, I would never do that with my team. But I think that there's a lesson here in that we all have something and we have to work together. Welcome, Dr. Melissa Merrick, President and CEO of Prevent Child Abuse America, someone I have known for a while and admired your work. And thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you, Maura. I've admired yours as well, and so happy to be in conversation with you.
Well, I thought that it would be helpful for folks. A big piece of what you study and what you educate on is the existence of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences.
Correct.
When I learned about ACEs, it really changed my life. I know for my team as well, our colleague and friend, Dr. Christine Coe, has written a lot about how working on ACEs campaigns for CDC and others sort of led to her own aha moments about how her childhood impacted her adulthood. So I thought we could talk about that today. Can we start by just telling the story of how ACEs came to be and what they are?
Sure. It's a loaded question. So let me start by saying, things that happen in childhood, both positive and negative, or both positive and challenging, right? They shape who we become. So it sort of sets the foundation. If you think of a house, you start with a foundation. We want foundations to be as sturdy as possible so it can withstand storms. I'm from Miami, so I talk about hurricanes a lot, but you want your foundation to be really secure and supportive, right? So the same is true in this ACE or adverse childhood experience science. The same is true in brain science. We've learned a lot over the past 30 years or so. I will say that the pivotal seminal adverse childhood experiences study started in the late 90s, and it started as a collaboration between CDC and Kaiser Permanente, a large HMO out of San Diego, California. And basically what happened was adults came in to their primary care physicians, and they were asked to retrospectively report on these ACEs, adverse childhood experiences that happened in childhood. So things like growing up with child abuse, right? Sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, different forms of neglect, different forms of family challenges, like growing up in a home with untreated mental illness or parental incarceration or other kinds of separation, maybe untreated mental illness in the home. So these things were kind of seen as, challenging things that might have happened in childhood. And what they found in that seminal study was ACEs were super common. So even among this mostly white, mostly well-educated, all insured by nature of an HMO sample, right? All these adults that, are kind of haves, right? They have a lot of access and such. Even in that group, over 2/3 had at least an ACE score of 1.
Wow.
There's been lots of studies across setting that find that same finding, right? In any population, in any subpopulation, that ACEs are common. 2/3 of the population have it. What you also know from this, decades long research now is that if you have an ACE score of 1, you're likely to have more ACEs, because we know that these types of challenges tend to co-occur in the same families, right? And what the other part, though, was that it wasn't just that ACEs were common. It's that as you had more ACEs, your risk of a whole host of physical health, mental health, life disruption problems increased, right? So it increased in this kind of graded dose response effect. So if you had 2 ACEs, you were more likely to have bad outcomes than if you had 1, and so on. We obviously find that as you have 4 or more, or certainly 6 or more ACEs, you are likely to have a whole host of the top 5, leading causes of death, let's say, right? Your likelihood for having those problems changes. But as I started, it's like, those are maybe the kind of risky things or challenging things, But we know that the good things that happen in that same period can balance the scales, right? So ACEs themselves are not deterministic, but it's important that we understand that they do change our likelihood to have these poor health outcomes so that we can really boost those good protective things or positive experiences that can really, tip the scales in the other direction.
What are some of the poor outcomes? You referenced health outcomes. What are some of the outcomes that it would?
Things like cardiovascular disease, the number one leading cause of death, right, has its roots in early childhood and ACEs, right? Things like mental health problems, for sure, suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts. So it's both mental health, which I think people kind of get a little more. They say, oh, well, you had a challenging childhood, you're more likely to be depressed, right? But that makes it very simplistic when there's a whole biology and psychobiology that is more sophisticated than that, but it's also physical health outcomes, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity. If we could prevent ACEs in the population, we could prevent up to 2 million cases of adult obesity, 44% of adult depression, right? I mean, it really has lifelong impacts.
A lot of my listeners, I think all of my listeners are adults.
Yeah.
And so hopefully they can take this on board for their own parenting. But they may be sitting here thinking, well, it's too late for me. My ACEs are long in the history books, done and dusted. What are some of the protective factors that you've studied in adults who manage to flourish despite ACEs?
I'll say a key protective factor is always healthy, safe, stable, nurturing relationships, right? So even just having one safe, secure, nurturing relationship can change outcomes across the lifespan. So not just for kids, but for adults, right? There's a lot of cool, like multi-generational studies of parents that had a history of their own adversity and ACEs and how parents come together, but even parents that have different histories impact the other's parenting, right? We can get good qualities from our partners, our parenting partners, and more, not so great qualities, but we tend to merge. And that's like really powerful to say that relationships matter. That is a key one. I would say there are things like, of course, getting mental health support if you struggle with mental health problems or any of those kinds of things, of course, change outcomes. I think more than I'm trained as a child clinical psychologist. So, really used to that sort of approach of a treatment focused approach. But I will say in this part of my career, really focusing on what are those good things, what's that good stuff that we want to boost early and often before people are in crisis or before we have a mental health crisis or impact. Right. So I would say relationships are a big one. Physical activity, being in nature, all of these things really do. Meditating. I mean, I'm terrible at it, but meditating has been proven. Any of that mindfulness, just taking a moment, deep breathing. I mean, there's a whole lot of sort of what we would say are like coping strategies, right? But they actually have strong evidence that they can change outcomes. So it's really not deterministic when you have these things, but in your childhood, but you do want to kind of know like what it does to your brain, how your brain is developed, like, and how it builds and even the way how our genes express themselves are all, largely impacted by those early years. So I think it's about being aware. And I think that's why Dr. Ko, our mutual friend really is like, oh, I learned something about like my journey and, my healing and resilience and thriving, even with maybe some challenges.
A high ACEs score.
Yeah.
A lot of the people that I work with, who I lovingly call anxious achievers, have this moment in their adulthood. They are successful. They are ambitious. They are strivers. Like they score high on the striving value and the achieving value. And they often are hypervigilant. They often are anticipating threats, and that pushes, they've sort of learned to channel that into performance. And I was curious, what the relationship is between that profile and an ACEs score.
Oh, absolutely. Well, think about it. I mean, really, especially, and I study particularly child abuse as the type of adversity that my career focuses on. But any of those ACEs, imagine growing up where you have to be vigilant. You don't know, what your house, what the vibe in the house is going to be, right? It's actually protective for you to develop that kind of vigilance, that kind of quick to freeze or, fight or flight, all of those things that in nature are protective and help, keep us safe and secure. Over time, they are taxing on our systems, right? On our endocrine system, our immune system. And so that's where something that's really adaptive in small pieces can become maladaptive, right? So it's the same where you think, ACEs are associated with substance use and misuse, for example, or risky sex behaviors. These are things, again, in the short thing, they can feel good and really feel like, you're doing well and coping. But over time, that leads to maybe some not so great health and life outcomes. So I think it's really recognizing that as leaders, as women, as mothers, working moms, high achievers, right? We're used to kind of having all the heavy, right? And we've learned to kind of navigate that in some ways. But just because we're able to navigate it doesn't mean that it's not weighing us down. It doesn't mean that there's not maybe a better way that we want to lift that stress and those stressors from early on off. And imagine how we could really thrive if we weren't having to hold that protective kind of vibe.
Right. Always responding to a perceived threat.
Yes.
It's funny. I'll never forget one of my very earliest interviews for my podcast was with a legendary venture capitalist, business person, and coach named Jerry Colonna. And we talked about hypervigilance as something that at work is so tricky because a lot of these characteristics are rewarded at work. And Jerry grew up, I'm sure he has a very high ACEs score. His mother had very severe mental illness. His father was an alcoholic, very much the sort of classic picture of waiting for his parents to come home and not knowing which parent would show up, like tough stuff. And how that hypervigilance from his childhood really helped him be super successful in many ways. And there's that tricky double-edged sword with a lot of this stuff. It's like, well, oh God, what if I get rid of this? Am I getting rid of a piece of me that is, even if it's weighing me down and making me miserable, am I getting rid of an essential piece of me?
Oh, yeah. It's such a critical thing. I hear a lot. People think that their ACEs or their trauma, their childhood adversity is their superpower. I mean, it has helped them develop all of what you just said, the balance and the navigating this complexity. And it's not until sometimes they get into mental health treatment or other things that they learn other things that actually are more effective and maybe actually feel better and also are not so, again, taxing on our systems. Again, leading causes of death, 5 out of the 10 leading causes of death are associated with an ACE score, right? Like a high ACE score. And if you have 6 or more ACEs, you are likely to die 19 years earlier than someone who doesn't have ACEs. And I don't know for the listeners out there, but just to let you know, as an epidemiologist, a 19-year difference in life expectancy is greater than any other illness, injury, or geographic comparison, right? Wow. We're talking about 20 years of life lost based on that early adversity. And so, yes, it can feel like to have to overcome something, you've developed this superpower and you're able to, and yet the research really shows we need to be thinking of more pro-social ways and ways that we can lighten our load. It doesn't mean that we, again, ACEs are not deterministic.
Right.
So we can, weather the storm often, but there are healthier ways to do it sometimes. And it's sometimes not until someone learns about this or they enter treatment or something else that they're like, oh, wait, oh, wow, this is related to my childhood. And this is,
maybe there's a better way.
Maybe there's a better way.
If ACEs aren't deterministic and yet these outcomes are tied to them, what is deterministic in the equation, in the soup?
Yeah, I love that. Well, it's really the complex interplay between risk and protective factors. So let me just say, even in the case of divorce, parental separation or divorce was in the classic seminal study. But we know from other research that divorce can actually be protective of outcomes. If you live in a highly conflictual home environment and then your parents get divorced and there's less conflict, actually you have better outcomes, right? So it's more complex than a simple ACE score. I think ACEs, though, given the simplicity of the scoring, it's easy for people to wrap their brains around. But I do want to let the listeners know that there is a more complex part of this, which is the interaction between all of these things. There's the frequency of these events, right? The chronicity, the age of onset, all of those things go into the recipe, if you will, on what the later outcomes are going to be. So when we look at ACEs as a population level kind of surveillance system, which it is, right? It's really collecting everybody's information, pooling it, and then we get these risk ratios. But yours, we could have the same ACE score. We could have totally different outcomes, right? Because of all the other stuff. So it's more complex. I think what is deterministic is the balance among everything, right? And we want to tip the scales to positive outcomes. So we want more good stuff.
More good stuff.
Bad stuff. I mean, that's really, really it.
I think that's a piece of it. I will share that I've been having this experience where my mom grew up with unbelievable trauma. And my mom and I are extremely close, and she has Alzheimer's now, and I care for her again. So a lot of my mom's stuff has come back into my life as I've been caring for her and dealing with her every day again, as a grown up. And it's been some really hard therapy recently to understand that I spent most of my life with my mom's trauma as a piece of me. I don't have a high ACE score. I have an ACE score. Not bad for a kid from the 80s, but my mom was off the chart and didn't get as resolved. And so, for me as a woman approaching 50, that has been, just a lot of questions about what does it mean to be my mom's daughter and what can I let go of, So it doesn't always have to be what am I trying to say? Sometimes it's like part of your growth as an adult, I would imagine.
Totally. And I think where you're hitting is that trauma impacts all of us.
Yeah.
Whether we're directly impacted and we have the ACE score, or we see it or carry it in our family and our siblings, our friend relationships, trauma is all around us, right? There's lots of things that are always happening. And so there is some sort of, reduction of shame that we hope comes from more people understanding that trauma is omnipresent. Like none of us, I don't think you can be alive at this moment in our history and not feel trauma all around us,
that's right?
No matter, and that's not a political statement. That's just a life and being alive at this moment, right? There's a lot happening always. And so sometimes it's under the skin, and sometimes it's really at the surface and really present, but it's always interplaying and such. And so what you say in terms of what does it mean to be your mom's daughter, and what are the things that you need to let go of, you're not responsible for, and what can you give? What's the good stuff you can give in this moment? And, you also talk about, this sort of sandwich generation time for us all, right? Where we're caring often for elderly parents while still raising children and humans and such. How that's another pull, and some might say another trauma moment, because we're trying to do all of these things and run successful businesses and not pay too much attention, but be informed. And it's like a constant what is it, seesaw or something.
I call it, it's the panini press of us getting smushed.
Yeah.
But I think that the ACEs is really, it's such a helpful lens. I think also I'm a big fan of trauma-informed leadership. And what I wanted to ask you is, what do managers need to know about ACEs to become better managers?
Well, I think a key one is that we all have some kind of adversity, right?
Yeah.
Whether it happened in our childhood or adulthood, we're all dealing with something. And so sometimes it's as simple as you don't know what this other person is experiencing, right? So that just genuine empathy, it doesn't stop when you come into your office, right? In fact, I would say as a leader, it's even more important here for people to feel seen, to be able to come as their authentic selves. And sometimes that means that they're dealing with some stuff and need a minute, right? At the same time, we have work to do and we want to, we have results and all of that. So I think there's something about the culture of a workplace that needs to allow for people to be, right? And that is harder in some industries than others. I'll say at my industry, it's a very emotionally focused industry, but that also means that we are kind of like emotional people all the time out loud, right? So that can sometimes be challenging too. So there's no perfect recipe, but understanding the culture, paying as much attention to culture as ROI and such, because we know that when people are well and people, are able to be in their full selves, they are able to make our businesses more money, that we're able to retain talent, right? So I would say a practical solution is like we've studied companies that have high quality on-site childcare. And they have all their moms come back to work after maternity leave, right? They are able to retain talent longer. They're able to be more productive, all of that, because you're taking a little bit of the edge off of working parents, right? Same is true in paid family leave and, all kinds of economic supports for employees. It's actually a good business strategy. Family friendly is good business.
It's very good business.
That's another
I wish... it's funny. I mean, I've heard in my career examples that are very nitty gritty. So, someone who had a lot of PTSD from a violent attack who's told her manager, I can't have my back facing anyone, I really need to be able to look out. And that to me is, that's very brave. And it's also very practical.
Yes.
Why trigger someone unnecessarily?
Correct.
Another example is a woman I interviewed who's a very successful leader who would tell her teams, listen, these are my triggers. And sometimes when I get very triggered, I fire off emails. I get kind of hyped up and I jump into action. And I've heard that this can be frustrating and I'm working on it, but it's not you, it's me.
Right.
Which I can understand managers listening to and being like, I would never do that with my team. But I think that there's a lesson here in that we all have something and we have to work together.
That's right. And being, every culture, every, workplace environment is different. So the same things are not going to work everywhere.
Right.
But knowing and understanding your culture, what things you can share with your team or expect that your team will share for you, just to be explicit. I don't know if it was your email, but someone recently sent me an email that said, my working hours may be different than yours.
That's me.
Oh, I loved that. I was like, I need to add that.
Feel free to cut and paste it.
I might, because I'm a classic 3 a.m. shooting up emails because that's the only way I can get back to sleep. I don't expect anyone to respond to me at that time, but some people don't like it. They don't like getting emails at that time.
Schedule is your best friend.
Yeah,
I mean, I truly believe that a lot of these big life issues do enact themselves in the workplace in seemingly petty, even ways, small ways, but they have a big impact. And
totally,
the more aware. What are some factors that you have found in people who flourish, really, who have, I guess what the term now is post-traumatic growth.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, it's kind of the factors we've talked about, the relational things, right? Which is difficult because we also know from the ACE complex research that if you have a lot of these adversities, you're more likely to not have healthy relationships as an adult, right? Yeah. And yet some of the most protective and healing and flourishing moments are in relationship with other people, right? So we want actually those positive, safe, stable, nurturing relationships. They make a big difference. I also think it's the brain science is really extraordinary here. Like Dr. Bruce Perry has studied, it's in these small interactions throughout the day that you're able to like change the good parts of your brain. Like you're able to access your executive functioning and such with just these small interactions. So it's almost better to have like a 5-minute conversation every hour with a friend than one long one on the weekend. The same is true for physical activity. It's actually shown that if you go on a 5-minute walk every hour, it's actually more healing than adding up all those 5 minutes and doing one long walk.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, you just made my day.
Yeah, me too, because 5 minutes seems achievable.
Yeah.
We sometimes don't get to the long walk at the end of the night. And obviously, if you do both, I mean, I bet that's even better. But it's just, it kind of breaks the assumption that like, oh my gosh, I had this challenging thing, so I'm going to need something just amazing to happen. No, it's like just finding those small moments can really help, retrain your brain, retrain your biology to withstand and overcome toxic stress to be flourishing.
Oh, that's fantastic. My last question for you, Melissa, is would you like to share any grounding resources or resources that you use when you're feeling a little bit like the stress meter is climbing up too fast and you need to at work?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there is nothing that can beat like a real deep breathing moment, right? I mean, just like if you are comfortable to close your eyes and just take a long breath, deep breath in and then blow it out. I mean, that again has a lot of science that it just kind of helps you refocus. It gets your heart rate down. It's just a biological good thing to do in moments of stress. Similar, like, integrating this exercise throughout your day. If you're able to do a meeting, walking outside or something like that, instead of sitting behind Zoom or in a conference room all the time, that can be really tremendous. But I also think, and maybe because I think my number one CEO skill or executive skill is that I'm a child clinical psychologist by training. It's just listening with humility, right? And listening not to respond, but listening to really understand. Because often people tell you what the challenges are, what their barriers are, why their work product is whatever, why, and that makes you like, oh, come on, why, and then when you really understand, you can kind of find like maybe they need a really simple accommodation, or maybe like their understanding of it is a little bit different than yours, and so I just think that listening with humility, that's something that's important in any work that you do, but it's important with your workforce. It's important, like our work is in service of children and families, but we better listen to what children and families need before we make our whole policy agenda, for example, right? So I think listening is really a superpower that we all, again, need to practice.
I agree. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. And last question is, where do you recommend people go if they want to learn more about ACEs?
Yeah, well, there's a great website on the CDC's website. You can learn all about it. It's at cdc.gov/violence prevention, I know is where you can find it. Certainly our website has a lot of tools and resources around ACEs. We're at preventchildabuse.org. But really, a Google search on ACEs these days, you should be able to find what you need. And yeah, that's what I would offer.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.